getting into gaming isn't cheap. You need to buy a PC or a console. Console's like $300 minimum, then you have to pay $60 a year just for the privilege of playing online. Then heaven forbid you actually want to play some games. You're out $70 a game now. So you just pony up for Game Pass, which is like $45 every 3 months. So you say screw paying to play online, so you decide to build a PC, then you realize PCs aren't cheap either. You've got lunatics out here paying the price of a scalped PS5 just for some DDR5 RAM. So you look into YouTube for answers and you find this video. Well, I'm here to tell you that getting into PC gaming can actually fit any budget. So in this video, we're going to make the cheapest PC I would recommend actually building. I'm going to set some ground rules for this PC. Shopping for deals is acceptable. I need to provide substitutions, suitable substitutions for all the parts I'm going to include in this PC. This PC is going to be entirely built new, off-the-shelf components. The substitutions don't necessarily need to be. This has to include a dedicated graphics card, no APU systems, even though that is a completely viable way to game on a budget, i.e. Steam Deck is just an APU system. It's amazing. I love it. And most importantly, we need to be able to play modern games at 60 FPS, 1080p. Let's do it. The big thing is selecting components. So let's go one by one of the parts I chose, how much they cost, and what I would swap them out for if you had a little bit or a little less money to spend on each component. So starting with the CPU, I chose the i3-12100F. I chose this because at the time of making this PC, the 12100F is the best CPU you can possibly get for around $100. If you can get the regular 12100 for the same price, you should do it, because it will give you integrated graphics, which can be extremely useful for troubleshooting purposes, or if you decide to wait and buy a GPU last, your PC will be functional sooner. If you have a little more than $100 to spend, you can go with the 12100 for its MSRP of $150, or go with the 12400F, which is available on Newegg for about $160 or $170. Alternatively, you could go with the Ryzen 3 4100 for about $100, which will perform closer to the i3, with upgrades from there being the Ryzen 5 5500 for about $140, which will give you 6 cores, 12 threads for not too much money, but you're sacrificing that IPC that the Intel CPUs have. So it's all dependent on your workload. If you intend on doing more content creation, you should probably go with the Ryzen chip, unless the application that you're using is has better driver support for Intel. There's all kinds of debates, AMD or Intel. What you should get depends on what you're doing. But for this, if you have more money to spend, just get the upgraded version of this CPU. The motherboard, I went with the Gigabyte B660M DS3H. That's a mouthful. I went with this board because it's a DDR4 board with PCI Express Gen 4 support and 2.5 gig Ethernet, which is useful for me using this machine for benchmarking purposes. It's amazing. I'm going to be downloading and deleting games and files just constantly, so having 2.5 gig Ethernet with my 2 gig internet is paramount. The board cost me about $110, bringing the current total up from $100 to $210. If you don't need the 2.5 gig Ethernet, something like the Gigabyte H610M board for $90 or the Asus Prime H610M board are good options and have the same features, except they have gigabit Ethernet instead of 2.5 gig and cost less. If you have a little bit more money to spend, something with Wi-Fi support or Bluetooth, or just getting a dedicated Wi-Fi / Bluetooth card for $20-30 extra would be extremely useful for, Wi-Fi. For the RAM, I went with a 16 gig kit of Neo Forza FAYE, or I don't know if it's FAYE or FAYE, but 16 gig kit of 3200 megahertz RAM, simply because it's 16 gigs for $50, bringing our total up to $260. If you have a little bit more money, it could be worth it to get a kit from a larger brand, or simply doubling up on these kits for 32 gigs of RAM. But I would personally grab a faster CPU before I doubled up on the amount of RAM. And I honestly would not recommend going with less RAM. You could probably find some slightly cheaper RAM, but you're splitting hairs and you're only going to be saving $1 or $2 and still getting a decent product. The power supply is a bit of a do as I say, not as I do. I need a large power supply because this PC is going to function as a test bench for me, and well, all manner of things are going to be connected to it, including, 3080, 2 Titan Zs, just normal, me shenanigans. So for normal use, I would recommend the Asus Tuf Gaming 550 watt bronze unit. It's a non-modular unit, but it only costs $55. Or get the EVGA B5 550 watt unit for $70 if you want something that's modular, meaning all of the cables can disconnect and you only use the ones you absolutely need. I went with the EVGA Supernova G Plus 850 watt gold unit for $100. So let's assume you make good life decisions and don't buy the power supply I did and spend probably $60 on a decent bronze unit. It'll bring the total up to about $320. If you have more questions in this department, see my video linked below for more help. For the case, I went with the Zalman S3 for 3 main reasons. 1, I've never built in it. I wanted to see what it was like. 2, it'll fit all of the components we want to put in it with room for larger components. And 3, it has pre-installed case fans, so I don't need to worry about the cost of the case, plus buying extra fans to keep my components cool. This case cost $60, bringing the total up to $380, but it is perfectly reasonable to purchase a cheaper case for $30 to $40, like the Thermaltake Versa H17 for $40, and getting a cheap 3-pack of case fans for $10 to $20 range. Just make sure when you're buying your case, you pick the case that will fit the components you want to use. If I had some extra dollars to spend here, I would either grab a different case, just beefier case, or grab something, some dedicated case fans, some nicer fans, or maybe a dedicated CPU cooler is also not a bad idea. For the storage, there's a couple of different schools of thought here. You can realize that SSDs are not quite a requirement yet, but consoles have them, so they're basically required now. You could also grab a hard drive, which will give you more total storage, but it will be significantly slower. And with the way software development is going, I don't recommend doing this because things are moving toward SSDs. You could also do a hybrid method where you have an SSD for Windows and your main games with a hard drive for bulk storage. For this build, we don't really have the budget for that, so I just grabbed a Western Digital Blue 500 gig NVMe SSD. It's fast enough for games, and it's got enough space for them. Not your whole library, but if you stick to two or three AAA games, you should be fine. Or if you just play games that aren't 200 gigs apiece, it'll be more than enough. And it'll be more than enough for long enough to give you time to decide if you need a dedicated hard drive. This drive cost $55, so let's call it $60 and jump the total up to $440. You can save some money here and grab a SATA SSD for $15 or so cheaper, which will bring your total down to probably $420. Nice. If you have more money to spend in this current segment, I would grab a dedicated hard drive for bulk storage, or you could probably get a 1 terabyte WD Blue on sale for about $50 more. Or hell, just buy 2 of them. By now you've probably figured out it's going to be next to impossible to keep it, this build under $500 for a brand new gaming PC, unless you're willing to do an APU build. We're not doing one of those, and I am not buying a 6400. I'm buying an RX 6500 for $200, well, 6500 XT. You can regularly find this exact card, which is the XFX Quick 210, for $180 ready to ship from Amazon or Newegg, which is the exact same price as the 6400, so just don't buy that. So let's say our grand total is up to $620. If you have a little bit more money to spend and are willing to buy used hardware, a used GTX 1080 can be had in American markets for about $250 to $300 without haggling. If you're willing to haggle on a used piece of hardware, you can probably get that down to about $200. If you're not willing to buy used, an RX 6600 or 3050 would be great substitutes for spending a little bit more money. What I would personally recommend doing for this build is to spend less money to get the same performance as the RX 6500 XT. Depending on the used market, you can grab a GTX 970 for about $60 to $100. The GTX 970 I purchased cost me $75, which would bring the grand total to $495, which is over $100 cheaper, allowing you to pump that extra $100 you just saved into different parts of the system, then upgrade the GPU in 3 to 4 years around the same time the PS5 Pro or whatever the next gen refresh is going to be called launches. Now, the GTX 970s are almost 8 years old, but they have significantly better feature sets than the RX 6500 XT, have the same or better performance in most games, and are less than half the cost right now. Might be a hard pill to swallow, and you run the risk of buying dead or dying hardware, so paying attention to reviews is extremely useful, but this is less than half of the cost. You could buy 2 of these 970s for the cost of one 6500. Anyway, that's all the parts, and moving on, the only challenge I ran into when assembling the hardware was the size of the power supply in the cabinet. I had to dent the hard drive cage to make sure this fit properly, and it was a relatively small cage, but if you grab anything smaller in the power supply department, it won't matter. You're gonna be fine. And other than that, it was a simple build process. The square thing goes in the square hole. This isn't a PC building tutorial. So how did this collection of parts perform? I've got benchmarks for both the 970 and the 6500. Both of these cards will be run in medium to high settings low to medium settings unless otherwise noted. Cyberpunk 2077 ran well on this machine, granting us a very playable 47 FPS average with a min and max of 28 and 91 respectively for the GTX 970. It was also very smooth. There was no stuttering, hitching, or general weirdness, but the RX 6500 XT did manage to pull a very slight win with an average of 55 FPS and a min of 27 with a max of 75. Both of these results were recorded with the in-game benchmark and then validated with an hour or so of in-game shenanigans. This was a playable experience. As a matter of fact, I forgot I was supposed to be benchmarking stuff and just kind of kept playing. Cold War is one of those games I'm not a huge fan of. I played it, enjoyed it for a bit, but I kind of hate skill-based matchmaking because I don't like sweating in my chair to play a game of domination, and these two cards going at it feels like that. Anyway, the GTX 970 pulled a win here, and spoiler alert, stays interesting. 970 scored an average of 66 FPS in Nuketown 24/7 with a minimum of 37 and a maximum of 154, while the 6500 XT scored an average of 61 with a min of 30 and a max of 150. So again, very comparable experiences. Moving on to the only game I hate more than Cold War, and the only game I test because everybody plays it for some reason, Fortnite. I got weird results here with the GTX 970 scoring an average of 90 and a minimum of 30 with a maximum of 122. The weird part isn't what the 970 did, it's what the 6500 XT did, having an average of 60 FPS with a min of 39 and a max of 105. That's weird because that indicates, if you take just this one game in a bubble, that these cards are in different performance classes, when in fact they're in the same performance class. I'm not quite sure what happened. This was the result of 3 games on average, so I guess Fortnite just doesn't like AMD cards. But anyway, it happened. On to our last game, and the only video game that made the church angry when it should have made them happy, because killing demons is cool. Doom Eternal. The 6500 XT came back swinging after its thrashing in Fortnite and managed an average of 80 FPS with a minimum of 57 and a maximum of 300. The 970 didn't go down without a fight though. Scored 58 FPS average with a minimum of 40 and a maximum of 85. So very respectable coming out of both of these cards. So that's it. Does gaming PC? Yes, it can game. Yes, we're able to do 60 FPS gaming at 1080p. You might have to dial back some of the settings in some of the games, but there it is, and there's good substitutions for all of the options. As far as graphics cards go, I think you know which way I lean, but both of the cards are good options. You know, the 970 is a little cheaper, but either way, budget builds are back. Maybe not for long, but they're back for now. If this video helped you at all, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. This was quite a bit of time and effort to make, and I will see you guys in next week's video.